everybody. This is our Dwarf Force lesson on foils. I'm trying a different way to record things, so hopefully this works out. So today we're doing foils and characters and in subplots. So a foil is basically a character who has the opposite, like personality or values or flaws, as the protagonist. So it's kind of like a yin-yang type situation where, like, they have like qualities that the protagonist doesn't have, and the protagonist will have qualities that the foil doesn't have. So they have what the other person is missing. So even though the foil is opposite of the protagonist, foil is not always the antagonist. Okay, so the antagonist is a character who is trying to prevent the main character from achieving their goal. So, villains are antagonists because they're trying to stop the main character from doing whatever the main character needs to do. So the foil can be an antagonist if they're like the evil counterpart to like a good hero main character, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all foils are going to be the bad guy. They just mean that they're the opposite of the protagonist. So, if you had a protagonist that was very shy, then the foil would be very outgoing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a good or bad dichotomy. It can just be they're just the opposite in whatever way. So the purpose of the foil is to give the reader a deeper understanding of the main characters. And there are different ways to do this. One, foils provide contrast. So the foils, like opposing qualities, will make the main character's strengths or weakness stand out more to a reader. So a really good example of this would be Watson and Sherlock Holmes. So Watson is like the everyday, quote-unquote, normal person who's very calm and just very, I don't know, like they're the everyman, right? And then Sherlock is like totally weird, and his worldview is like totally different from everybody else's. And if you didn't have Watson to be the contrast to Sherlock, the reader would get used to Sherlock being really weird and thinking of things in a completely different way than the rest of society thinks. And so we would get adjusted to that, and then it wouldn't be weird anymore. But because Watson is always there to provide the contrast of him being like the time period Victorian sensibilities, it's always going to make Sherlock's differences stand out because you've always got Watson to compare it to. So if you didn't have the contrast, you wouldn't have the same understanding of just how different the main character is for whatever reason. So it's a good way to provide contrast. Another one is to give context to the main character's actions and, worldview. So a really good example of this is Romeo and Juliet. So if anybody remembers from public school or high school or whatever the Europeans call it, Mercutio is Romeo's like best bud in the whole world, and his attitude towards love is very practical and sensible, and he doesn't really like love is not the end all be all only reason for living for Mercutio. So when you have that, it kind of gives more context to Romeo's love for Juliet being very obsessive, and he's very fixated on her in a way that's like not normal. Okay, so if you didn't have Mercutio to kind of provide the context of what a healthy attitude towards love is supposed to be versus Romeo, Romeo might seem more like a lovesick teenager because, when you're young and you fall in love for the first time, everybody gets like a little fixated on it, and that's normal. And we would be like, oh, well, that's normal, but it's not normal. And the only way that you really can see how not normal that is for Romeo is having Mercutio there is like a balance to be like what's considered normal. So like foils in this context can be like a baseline to compare the main character to, and then they make the main character's actions and thoughts seem better or worse than if you didn't have the foil. This one is my favorite type of foil, and that is a foil that is like an alternative version of the main character. So this foil is where they have all the same qualities as the main character, but this is like who the main character could have been if they had different choices made in life, or if they had been raised differently, or if they had been lucky compared to the foil, or unlucky compared to the foil. Um, so because they have the same qualities, these qualities come out in opposite ways because of the kind of lives that they have led. So a strength for one character is going to turn into a weakness for the other character. So this really works well with like the villains and antagonists and like rivals for the main character, because then you can be like, well, we're not that different, and I could have been just like the villain if I hadn't been lucky, or if I didn't have my support system, or if, you know, I had been raised by a family. So then you can kind of show like that the antagonist or the rival or the foil is not that different than the main character, and like a lot of the times it's luck that kind of shows us in life um, what kind of people we turn out to be. So it's like a nurture argument instead of a nature argument. So um, as far as Dragon Age goes, for foils, um, a lot of the times, you know, they have so many different party member characters be opposites of each other that no matter what choices you make as an Inquisitor or a Warden or a Hawk, you're going to be a foil to one of the party members because you're going to be the opposite of them. And then other things like, you know, Corypheus and Solas are supposed to be foils of, like, you know, they're both, you know, considering themselves a type of god, but they have very different attitudes towards the gods and being a god, and like the Fade and what the Fade's purpose is for, and what they're going to do to the world. And like they have the same kind of end goal. They have very, very different reasons for it. So a lot of the times people really think that Corypheus is like a foil for Solas, but of course you don't know that till uh, you know, the end of the game. And then Cassandra and Solas make really, really good foils for being total opposites in the way that they grew up, and their religion, and their attitudes towards magic and spirits, and their race, and the problems that their races have had. And like, so there's lots of good foils. And then like Fenris and Anders, I think, are really good foils, especially like the alternative character foils, you know. So they've both kind of gone through the same thing by the other person's like race or magic capability, and then, you know, but they deal with that trauma in very different ways, and they have very different worldviews because of it. So they are also a really good example of foils. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is that subplots can also be a foil for your main plot. Okay, so they're not just characters. You can have a subplot run alongside the main plot and have the events work out in different ways on a different scale than the main plot. So, for example, you know, if we're going to go back to, I have a joke character that's Timmy, the cop who's afraid of dogs. So Timmy is trying to solve a murder case, and then meanwhile someone is stealing all of his packages outside his apartment door. So you have these two plots that at the base are a mystery, but then you could have opposite outcomes. So maybe he's able to catch the murderer, but he has no idea who steals his mail, and he never figures it out. Or it could be solved in different ways. So like maybe Timmy solves the murder case in a professional, logical manner because that's part of his job, but like he gets really mad that someone is taking his mail, so he starts getting increasingly like more desperate to catch this person. And so then you see like another side of Timmy. Or you could just have like the mail plot be really funny and lighthearted, and that can showcase like how dark and horrible the actual murder case really is, you know, and give that contrast. So so foils are very excellent tools in literature, and I really love using them.